Rachel Mills with Making Grey Needlecraft. Today we are going to be knitting slippers. So I've got these slippers that I've actually made right before Christmas. I made these. They are using a rather thick yarn actually, and they're quite a simple pattern. So this is the sort of pattern we're going to be making today. We're going to start by starting our knitting so that it is about 10 inches long, or for centimetres, I believe that'd be about 25.5 centimetres, something like that. So you might want to have some sort of measuring tool with you, but it's going to be a ruler or tape measure or whatever. So to figure out how to make sure our knitting is going to be 10 inches long, you might just say, oh, I'll just cast on and then make it till it's about 10 inches and then I'll start knitting. The thing with that is that casting on sometimes leads you to your stitches get wider once you start knitting them, and then you realise you casted on about 10 inches worth, but then it becomes more like 20. Not quite that bad, but still, like more like 15 or something. It might be a bit bigger than you wanted. So the pattern is quite adaptable, thankfully. So even if it does get a little bigger than you meant, it could still work, or a little smaller as well. You get a more sort of ballerina type sort of slipper if you make it a little bit shorter. So the needles I have, I think they are actually 6mm. You can read it right over there. I also have a handy little stitch measure or needle measure, so I can figure out exactly how big they are, because they're not always marked properly. So, because of my needles are a bit bigger, if I try to just use the one string of yarn, I think my knitting would end up just a little bit too airy, and I want nice warm slippers. So actually I am going to be doubling up my yarn. So I'm going to put 2 yarns together and hold them together like one and just knit normally. And I will have thicker yarn, and it'll be sort of multicoloured, so that'll be quite fun. So if you realise you have that problem where your yarn is too thin and your needles are too thick, or your needles are too big and your yarn's too thin, and you're going to make a sort of airy fabric, and you don't want that, then double up is my best advice to you. So we're going to do our long tail cast on, just like we did in our last video. There we go, but except we're just using the 2 strings together. So we do our, there we go, our slip knot, put that on, and here we go. So I'm just using it like normal. So to start, I'm actually not going to do my full, like however many stitches I think I need. I'm just going to do a wee gauge. Here we are. There we go. So I'm just going to do a wee gauge there. Not that many. I'm just going to try to figure out how big my stitches are, so how many I'll need to do. Here we go. Gets a little bit chaotic sometimes with 2 yarn balls. So I'm going to start knitting. So now this is the part where you have to decide what kind of stitch you're going to do. If you can purl now, see, that's another problem actually with knitting with 2. I've only have the 1 yarned over. You always have to make sure your 2 come yarn over. And you also have to make sure that you always stick your needle in the 2 of them, not just the 1, or you're going to end up messing up your number of stitches, and your work is going to end up growing in weird ways, or shrinking in weird ways if you really mess around. So there we go. So now this is the point where you have to decide what kind of pattern you want to do. If you can purl, that's amazing, and you have the option to be able to do this sort of smooth type on your slipper and the bumpy bit within, and that would be really cool. Or if you can only knit, that's absolutely fine. You can just keep knitting. Today, I think I'm going to actually just keep knitting. But if you can purl, this would be the point where you would now do a purl row, because you see the bumps. So now you would purl. but I'm just going to keep knitting. I was talking too much about purling. I almost purled there actually. So I'm just going to keep knitting there. Although we're not doing the actual slipper yet, it's important that if you are going to purl, you do your gauge, that's what we call this, a gauge. Your sort of swatch, where you're kind of figuring out how big it's going to be. You do it in the same stitch that you're doing, because purling, when you do the sort of stockinette stitch where you have the smooth side and the bumpy side, it makes the width of your knitting different than if you were just doing garter stitch, we call it, which is the kind of bumpy on both sides stitch, where you only knit your rows. So here we are. Now I'm going to measure it. So I'm going to grab my measuring tape. Done just a couple of rows, maybe do one more, but just a wee check. And that is about 2 inches. So now, how many stitches does that make? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8. So 2. How many 2 stitches does it take? This is a bit of math now, so that's fun. But you can use a calculator. I always use a calculator. So 2. Basically, the math is you gotta figure out how many 2 stitches are in the 10. So I believe it would just kind of be 10 divided by 2. And that's 5. So whatever number you have, whatever many inches, just divide that by what you need, by your 10. So 2 in this case, maybe your swatch is 3. So then you have to do 3 divided by 10. But for this case, it's a bit easier. 2 divided by 10, which is 5. Remember, you grab your calculator out, please. I would right now, but I'm filming on my phone right now. So 2 divided by 10, 5. And now 5 times how many stitches you have. And we have 8. So 5 times 8. Okay, 40, yes. So I'm going to do 40 stitches. So now I'm going to take that all apart. Get my nice long tail again. Do my slip knot, put that on, and cast on 40. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. And there should be roughly 10 inches. It's a little shorter right now, but once we knit, it should become about roughly 10 inches. It's not a perfect method. It has failed me on a few occasions, so you might need to tweak things. So you should check things early on and do not be scared to redo them. You should not be scared to redo them and frog your knitting occasionally. I understand why you would be, but also remember and write down how many stitches you've cast on, because it's a slipper. So you're going to make 2. So you'll want to remember exactly how many, so you don't have to fiddle around, maybe get the wrong number and have two kind of awkwardly sized slippers. So now at this point, I'm just going to be knitting straight. If you can do purling, then you can alternate it and have one row knit, one row purl, one row knit, one row purl, and have that lovely smooth side and bumpy side. If you can't, don't worry, just keep knitting. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to knit for just quite a bit. I'm actually going to measure the slipper. And you might even want to measure your feet a little bit, you know, just kind of be like, okay, where do I roughly want to end this? So from here to the end is about 7.5 inches, but I'm actually going to cut it off over here because once I get to this point, I'm going to start decreasing stitches so I get a toe. So at this point, I would say about 5 or 5.5. So I'd roughly, 1.5 to 2 inches, let's say. Yeah, at roughly 2 inches to your end of foot. I actually won't drag my foot on the table, but let's pretend this is your foot and you kind of measure from your toe down. That's about 2 inches. That is where you need your knitting to reach. So then you want to measure that and say, okay, that's about 6 inches, perfect. So now you'll need to knit until your knitting measures 6 inches long, which might take a wee bit, but it'll give you something to work on during lockdown, which is great. So you can do that, work on that for about 6 inches. And then once you get that, we'll be decreasing. So I'm not going to knit that much, I don't think. I don't think I have time to, but I'll knit a wee bit, come back and then show you how to decrease and cast off. Alright, now we're back. So I've done a bit more. So now you might need to do a bit more actually. I also want to mention that you might want to make this thinner depending on your size of feet. If you have smaller feet, like thinner feet, then you might want to do something that's only going to be like, let's see, like 8 inches long or something like that. Depends. But anyway, another thing I wanted to mention, just a few more things before we go in to go on to the next step, is that you might want to make your slipper smaller rather than larger. If you're kind of, oh no, like should I make it a little, like an inch smaller, an inch larger, make it an inch smaller, because knitting is stretchy. Look how stretchy that is. And I personally prefer a slipper that fits me a little more snug than a slipper that's going to fall off my foot. You may have slightly different preferences, but yes, something to keep in mind. Another thing I wanted to mention, one last thing I wanted to mention was the gauge. When I measured the gauge, I had that like 8 stitches that were exactly 2 inches. That might not be true for you. So you might be able to, I can do this right now, I can measure my gauge from this and say, okay, let me only measure 1 inch from that. Okay, that's about 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, roughly 4. Again, we're going slightly smaller rather than bigger. Like if I want to try to include this little one, that will give me a bigger gauge. So that's why I'm going slightly smaller rather than bigger and leaving him out, even though he's quite close to that beginning bit, if you can see that properly. Let's bring that really close. So you can see this stitch. That almost makes it 5 stitches, doesn't it? But we're going to ignore him because he's just he just makes things a little too big, is all. So, now that has been discussed, our next step of the project is to start decreasing. Does anyone remember how to knit 2 stitches together? That's a rhetorical question, I know you can't answer me. So, we'll start by knitting 2 stitches together. So that's about my insertion technique, and then we knit 1, and then we insert it behind this one so that we get 2, and then we just knit like normal. So knit 1, just normally, and then we knit 2 together. Let me do that again. Knit 2 together, knit 1, make sure we get both around, insert, so knit 2 together, knit 1, 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 and we only have 1 over here, so we can't really knit together with anything, so I'm just going to knit it and not worry about it. So now the next row we're just going to knit normally. Now if you are doing purling, you may have to purl 2 together, or else purl like normal in this part if you're doing the purling part. If you're not, then don't worry, you're just knitting, and that's all you need to worry about. Also, if you're purling and you don't want to end up trying to purl 2 together, you can just try to set it up so that on this row would be your purling part, so you just have to do the knit 2 together. Since you'll be repeating this sort of process where this row you knit 1, you just knit your row like normal, and now your next row you're going to do the exact same thing you just did, where you knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, and we're going to be repeating that until we have about 7 stitches on the needle maybe. I'm honestly not exactly sure, I might go figure it out, but yes, it will depend on how many stitches you had to cast on. So you're going to be knitting until you have between 5 to 10. So between 5 to 10 stitches left on your needle. Oh, this is the part actually where I will be knitting 2 together. Actually, I'm going to start knitting 1, knit 2 together, knit 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 1, knit 2 together, just like that, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, and knit 2 together. There we go, and now like I said, the next row I'll just be knitting normally. Already my stitches have decreased, so I'm getting more of the toe that's going to happen, because if you look in the finished one, it gets thinner over there. So that's what you're basically doing right now. You're just getting it thinner. So once it's about 7, once it's like only these many stitches, remember just counting your stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And just count them all. And once you have around that amount, you can just grab your yarn, get it to a wee bit, not too much, but not too little. In this case, you're probably better off with a little bit more, and then cut it. And once you've cut it, you can then slide it through your loops. So pull the string through the loop, pull the string through the loop, pull the string through the loop. Now again, I should have about 7 stitches before I start doing that. And then once I've gotten them all off, every single last one off, I don't have that right now, but you will, I'll pull it nice and tight so that it makes a sort of circle, like that. It'll be pulled nice and tight together. And then I will be able to sew the 2 sides together. Not too much. If you look over here, I've done that from here. I've pulled all my stitches together to make this sort of round bit, pulled them all together and tied it off. I think I've tied it off over here. So I've tied that off. If you have like a sort of yarn needle, this would be the point to use it, or a crochet hook. It can actually work really, really well. So yes, they're called darning needles. You can maybe get a picture of a darning needle on screen and a crochet hook, because mine are in the other room. So, darn needle or crochet hook could work perfectly. Go a little ways up, make sure you leave a hole to fit your foot inside. You'll also have to sew up this section. This sort of beginning section, you just sew it together, just 2 sides like that, and you'll have this. And then it will lay nice and flat, you can get your foot inside, and it will stretch for you, and it'll be lovely. So it'll be something like that, roughly. That sewn up, a little bit of this sewn up, and your hole for your foot. Remember to leave a big enough hole for yourself, for your foot. So that is how we make a slipper. So I'll see you all next week. I can't wait to see all your slippers. Have a good one, stay safe, bye bye.